All right, hello. Welcome to this tutorial for our summer school on 3D imaging and modeling and cultural heritage. Today, Gabby is going to give a run through of the 3D modeling software TinkerCAD. This is a web-based software created by Autodesk, and it's, well, we're going to go through the basic functionalities of creating simple 3D models or editing existing ones. So after you, Gabby.
Great, thanks, Alicia. So this is the interface after you've logged into TinkerCAD. I haven't done anything else except for log in, and I'll show a couple of things you might want to do before you start in a moment. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the basic interface and some of the sort of navigation around it, and some of the ways in which you can use some of the stock shapes, which you can see on the right here, to create shapes, merge them into one another, use them to subtract from one another, etc., and make sort of basic shapes from that. So it's not highly sophisticated, but you can often make relatively useful things out of it, which you might then want to 3D print, for example. Or import into another 3D model or something like that. So I'll start by, and let me see if we make the screen a little bit bigger, if we can see the text fully in there. The first thing that I would note is that so I've logged in and I've said create a new 3D model, and that's what I've I've not shown that part, but I did that before we started. And so the first thing it's done is it's given this 3D model a randomly generated name. And the name is Fantastica Krunk in this case. I have no idea what that means. You probably want to change that name to something else, unless you happen to be going to create a Fantastic Krunk which probably would be exciting, but again, I don't know what that is. So I will change that name. Remind me if I don't do so before the end. But I will decide on the name when we've created a model. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to show some of the functionality of moving things around, and then I'm going to get rid of all that, and I'm going to import an existing 3D model that I downloaded from somewhere else, and I'm going to use these sample shapes, stock shapes, to enhance that in a certain way. So the first thing to note is that this interface works basically like most of the other 3D interfaces you've seen. So quite often it'll be much easier to navigate with a mouse. If you're trying to navigate with the keyboard or with the trackpad, it'll be a mess. So with the mouse, it's going to be a lot easier. If you left click on the mouse, you usually select things. If you right click on the mouse, you will rotate around, and obviously, as with anything else, we're moving the mouse in 2 dimensions in an attempt to navigate a 3-dimensional plane, so it doesn't always work the way we want. So I can rotate it sort of backwards and forwards this way. If I want to rotate it side to side by moving side to side, instead it rotates it across the base, because there are only 2 dimensions on my mouse pad. So that's just something we'll have to sort of work around. The scroll button allows you to zoom in and out. And if you hold down the scroll button, you pan around. So I'm moving my view that way. So the simplest way to create a model is to select an object from over here on the right-hand side. And there are many sort of shapes that you can select from, but the simple geometric shapes are often the best. I'm going to create something that is a cylinder. And if I just drag from the left there onto the object, you can see it's created a cylinder. I'll rotate so that I can see it there. And it's created a cylinder which is, I think it's 20 pixels, 20 millimeters by 20 millimeters by 20 millimeters. So if I want to change the shape of that and the size of that in any way, I could do so by dragging these various points. The thing to note is that at the moment, because it's in 3 dimensions, changing it across changing its footprint, as it were, you do using these 4 corners. Changing its height is done using this single pixel at the top, single select button at the top. And if you want to move it up and down, you do so using this arrow up here. This here will also allow you to rotate it, and you can rotate it either with a free rotate by 1 degree at a time, or if you hover slightly closer in, it rotates it by a sort of snap to the nearest rotate. So if you want to rotate something exactly 90 degrees, it's easier to do it by snapping in here than it is to try and find exactly 90 degrees and keep missing it at the outer rim. So you just do it from there. So I don't actually want to rotate this object. So let's say I want to take this object. I'm selecting the object. I actually want to make a cylinder which is very wide and quite flat. So I'm going to drag the corner. If I drag just the corner, I can move it to any degree. You can see the dimensions are being kept there. So it's no longer a perfect cylinder because the surface is an oval rather than a circle. But if I hold down the shift button while I'm dragging it, it keeps its proportions. And that's the height as well as the two horizontal and vertical proportions. So I've got, as the cylinder remains 65 millimeters in both dimensions, 70 millimeters in both dimensions. It's also in the third dimension, it's also remaining the same 68 millimeters high, which is fine at the moment, but let's say I actually only wanted this about 1 centimeter high. Let's drag this down to 10 millimeters. And I'm doing this now without holding down the shift key. So it's not changing the height and width, the width and length of it, only the height. So I've now created myself, and I can drag it to be back in the middle of the field. I've now created myself a cylinder which is not the shape of the original cylinder, but it's slightly larger across the base and slightly shorter in height. I can then combine this cylinder with another shape. So I can say I want this cylinder to have a sphere sticking out of the top of it, like so. It's also sticking out of the bottom very slightly. Or maybe it's not. No, it's probably not. So the sphere has probably also been created 20 by 20 by 20. So it's sticking out by the top half of it is sticking out of the top of my cylinder. So I've created a sort of flying saucer shape there, and it's still two separate shapes. So if I move one of them, it leaves the other one behind, right? So if I want to be perfectly centered, I do that. I can select both of them together. And then move them around together. But if I click off, I can click back onto one and move that one around on its own, change its height, for example, so I can make that a sort of taller. It's no longer a perfect sphere, spheroid sticking out of the top of the object, and so forth. So that's one way you can do things. But actually, a nicer way to combine two shapes, and a very powerful way to combine two shapes, is if you take a shape, and the two of them are predefined here as holes rather than solids. But say I want to create a hole that's any other shape, I can just select the shape. So I say I can select another cylinder or a cube. In this case, I'm going to create a cube, or a cuboid, and I'm going to place that. I'm going to turn that. You see, I've got two options. It can be solid or a hole. I'm going to turn it into a hole, and when I move that into the middle of my cylinder, and I'm going to move it down just very slightly, just to make sure that it sticks out of the bottom. You can see it's now made a hole through my cylinder. You can't really see through it, but it is clearly it's a hollow shape superimposed with my solid shape that I originally had. And now this is where this becomes fun. If you select the entire object, I've just used Control A to select all, but you can also do it by drawing around it, and then you use this combine button up here, the group button, or you press Control and G. This then groups them into a single shape, and you've now got a cylinder with a square hole all the way through it, right? And this is not necessarily a particularly useful shape, although for some engineering uses it might be. You could do something similar to add a series of triangles around the edges, as sort of ratchets, if you were making a cog of some kind. There could be all sorts of things you might do, but you can imagine if you want to make yourself, a housing for your Raspberry Pi or something like this, you can make it by combining various shapes until you get the shape and size that you want, and then you can combine them all, group them all, and then export them and 3D print them. So I could export and 3D print this, but I'm not particularly interested in doing so. This shape is, as I say, potentially useful to some people, not particularly useful to me. So I'm just going to select it and delete it. What I do want to do now, and this is just to show you the other feature you can use TinkerCAD for, is I'm going to import. You see the import button up here on the right. I'm going to import a file, and you can go choose it from your file navigation, or you can just drag it into the the window from outside. This is a file that's called Gecko Even Better. I don't remember where I got this file from. Apologies to the people whose file it was, that I'm not giving them full credit for it. And it's just worth checking that if I import it at 100% of its assumed scale, it will be about 78 millimeters on its longest axis, 43 millimeters, and 12 millimeters on its shortest axis. The fact that it's called in length, width, and height is, and that sounds about right. Sometimes it'll be really, really small, and you'll think, okay, that's a bit odd. You might want it a bit bigger. Let's say. So my thought was I was going to import this gecko to make it into an earring, and as an earring, I probably don't want it to be 8 centimeters long. I probably only want it to be about half that. So I'm just going to say 50% scale. I could also select the scale from this. So 40 millimeters, that's still quite long for an earring, but let's say I like big earrings. So I'm going to import the object into the work plane, and it'll take a few seconds. You can see it's being prepared on the bottom left there, and that will be imported. And so in order to turn this into an earring, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a small loop to the top of it, and then we can attach a fishhook to that loop. Okay, so here's our gecko. I'll need to zoom in for that to be useful. You can see it's quite a nice shape. It's a shape that I could not have crafted using TinkerCAD. So this has to have come from somewhere else. Someone could have crafted it in something, or someone could have scanned it or imaged it. So one thing we might want to do is you see it standing sort of on one side on the thing. I mean, we'll want to print it. I mean, you can also re-rotate this in printing, but we'll want to print it lying flat, right, on its flat level. So I'm going to select the object here, and you can see the rotate option up there. And if I rotate through 90 degrees, it's now flat. It's not on the ground, of course, but one thing I'll show you, and get rid of that box, I'll show you if I go to this move button at the top that raises and lowers it, it'll tell me both this higher number, 0.21 at the moment, tells me how much I'm moving it by, and this lower button down there, 9 millimeters currently, is telling me how high off the baseline this is. So that's convenient because I just want to move this to 0 off the baseline, so it's lying flat on the ground. And it looks now as if the gecko is lying flat on the ground, and that's going to work just fine. So there's the first sort of navigation of that, and then I just want to add a small loop to this. And I found through prior experimentation that if I use this torus shape, and if I make it 5 millimeters across, at keeping it to its original proportions, then it will be the perfect size for attaching a fishhook to and making it a earring. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to resize that. It comes out at 20 millimeters like everything else when we create it, but I'm going to reduce it to 5 millimeters, and I'm keeping I know I forgot. I was pressing the wrong key. I meant to keep the shift key down. So keep the shift key down, then it keeps its proportions the same, and you can see it's 5 millimeters, both width and breadth, and it's whatever it is, only a couple of millimeters high. So that's fine. In order to be level with the gecko, so I guess I should ask myself, do I want this gecko hanging from my ear by its tail or by its nose? I'm going to say by its nose. So one thing I can do is if I go to this navigation up here, I can select top, and then I'll be looking straight down on it. So if I then move by clicking on the blue of the object, I can move it to roughly where I want it to be down there, and I can move it some more afterwards. But I can then use the raise and lower arrow to move it up to the right height of the nose of the gecko. So that's about right. Note that at the moment this snap grid option down here, it's snapping to 1 millimeter. So if I want to move it sort of 0.5 millimeter, then I can change to snap to a different degree. I can snap to a 0.5 millimeter, 1/4 millimeter, 1/10 of a millimeter, or just not snap at all. I'm going to say snap to 0.5 millimeter. That gives me a little bit more control, because I want to move this object a little bit further into the nose of the gecko. And No, I think the height is okay. I don't need to mess around with the height. So let's say that's where I want to put the loop that I'm going to attach the fishhook to. Again, I want to select all and group. I've now got a single object. In a second, it'll finish merging it. Okay, there we go. And this is now a single 3D model that can be exported, downloaded, saved elsewhere, printed, incorporated into some other tool or something. I said that I was going to change the file name of this, so I'm going to change this to be Gecko Hearing. And then when I press export, it will save it. I can say I want to save it as an OBJ or an STL, the two file formats which are best for 3D printing from, and it'll save it with that file name. So it's going to save it as an STL. It's preparing for export. It's going to appear on my desktop, and we can look at 3D printing it on another occasion. I think that's about all I want to show you of TinkerCAD right now. Unless there's anything Alicia has to add.
No, I think that was a great overview. Yeah, it's quite a basic software, but very useful and powerful for our purposes. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, cool, great. Thank you very much.
Okay.